This is a Power Apps application with a modern UI and layout for its table filters. And in this video, I'll show you how to build yours. In my last video, we explored how to design a multi-view gallery. And in this video, we will build on that by designing a modern filter layout. This layout gives you the ability to add as many filters as needed without any space constraints by adding a scroll bar. It can also accurately count all active filters and provide options to clear them individually or in bulk. And most importantly, this layout can be used in a variety of scenarios. It is versatile and works well whether you are building a responsive gallery or a static gallery. Anyway, with that being said, let's get into the video. In today's demo, we will continue building our car lease management app. If you want to see how we got to this point, be sure to check out my last two videos and links are in the description. As always, all apps, components and datasets featured in my videos are available for download to my Patreon and YouTube channel members. So join the community today if you're interested in following my tutorial step by step. Okay, now let's build our app. If you've seen the first two videos in this series, you would notice that the app is designed to be partially responsive. Now, what do I mean by that? This means that although I've locked the app's aspect ratio to a 16:9 desktop viewport and enabled the scale to fit setting, I've also ensured a proper page layout using containers. This approach allows us to treat the app controls as responsive, with their size and position dynamically adapting to their parent containers. For example, if I want to change the width of my page content, I can disable the flexible width setting and set a fixed width of 1000. Now, you might notice a few areas of the app appear to be a bit cramped, but the overall structure of the app remains intact. For those cramped spots, adjustments can be made. For instance, the model column currently has a minimum width of 150, which is quite large, and by reducing this minimum width to 100, we can create more space for other columns. Applying similar adjustments to other columns in the table will result in a layout that looks just like it did when it occupied the full screen. Now, this is a major advantage of using containers, and given that I already have a grid layout, converting this to a fully responsive application will require minimal effort. And as you can imagine, achieving this flexibility would be impossible with a static app layout. Now, moving on, the idea behind this filter layout is to dynamically reduce the width of the page content to create space for the filters when a button is clicked. Now, you're most likely wondering, what if my app has a static layout and it's not easy to convert it to a partial or fully responsive app?
I got you, homie.
We would cover that at the end of the video, so stay till the end to find out how. Now, before we start anything, we need to decide how small we want our page content to be when the filters are expanded. In our case, when expanded, I want the page content to take up approximately 80% of the width of the page and have a minimum width of 1000, and then the filters can take the remaining 20%. So let's build that. Now, the first thing to do is to add in a container which will serve as the structure for our filters. And since we want the filters to be vertically stacked on each other, we are going to use a vertical responsive container. So we'll select the root container and then add in a vertical responsive container. Once that is added, we're going to do the sizing. So for the page content container, we want it to have a minimum width of 1000, and then the filter container will take the rest. So I'll just rename that, and this will serve as a filter container. Now, the next thing is that we want it to open or close on click of a button. So this is the button we are going to use, the filter button. Now we are going to set the button to this formula. So we are setting var filter open and toggling it on click of a button. So it's a Boolean variable. So when you click it the first time, it is set the value to true, then to set it to false, basically toggling it between true and false. And now we are going to use this variable to control the visibility of our filter container. So we're going to set the visible property to our new variable that we just created. So by default, it is false, but once we click it, it becomes true, and then the filter container becomes visible. So on click of the button, it goes away. On click of it, it comes back. And now if we look at our grid view, you'll notice that the text is obviously too big for this compacted view. So what we are going to do is to reduce the font size when it is compacted. So you're going to set the font size variable, font size value to this code. So if var filter open sets the font size to 10, I'll set it to 12. What this means is that if the filter container is visible, we are going to reduce the font size to 10, but then if it's not visible, we leave the font size as 12. So let's test that out. You can see now the filter is closed, it returns back to its original 12, but once the filter is open, it comes back to what's it called, 10. I would also remove the bottom padding for the top text and the top padding for the bottom text. So just because I want them to be a little bit in the middle and it will look better that way. Yeah, and that's great. So let's go back to our list view. Now that is done, the next step is to set up the base structure of our filter container. So we're going to select it, and then let's remove the border radius and drop shadow. We don't need that. And let's also set the minimum width to 0, so it will always take only whatever space is left after the paid content has taken its 1000. So now we are going to add in a container that will serve as a filter title, and this one is going to be a horizontal container now because we want the title and then a button side by side. And then let's add in another container. This one will be a vertical container, and this one will serve as the containers that house the individual filters. For the title container, we want it to have a static height of about 80. And let's also remove the drop shadow and border radius. We do not need that. And do the same thing for the other container. So no drop shadow, no border radius. That's great. And then for the, let's also just rename it so we can reference it easier. So for the section title, we want that to have a background color of white. That is just to give it some distinction from the rest of the container. So we're going to set the background color to white. And then let's also add in a separator between the two containers. That even gives it a bigger distinction. So for that, we are going to use, select the parent container, and then we're going to use a rectangle for that. So a rectangle, and we want it to fill the width of its parent. So we're going to set its width alignment to stretch, set the minimum width to 0, and for the height, we want it to have a height of 0.5. And let's move it up to be in the middle of the two of them. And then as for the color, we are going to use our border color that we use on the rest of our app, and that is a light or dark gray rather. And yeah, that looks much better. Okay, so now that's the base structure done. The next step is to subscribe to my YouTube channel.
Listen, come here. Shut your stupid
If you've learned something in this video, please like the video and subscribe to the channel to get notified when I release new content. The next step is to start adding the individual filters and all of that. So let's do that now. Let's start with the filter section title. I would add in a text label, and we want it to fill the height of a spread container. So we set its height alignment to stretch, set its minimum height to, let's say, about 0. And then we also don't want it to be touching the edge of the containers. So let's select our two containers, and then so I'm control clicking to select the two of them. And then we are going to set the left padding to 10, set the right padding also to 10. So that gives it a little bit of padding all around it. Yeah, so back to our filter section title. So I'm just going to restyle this one. So we're going to set it to later. Let's set it to semi bold. I think that's okay. Later 13. And let's set the text to filters. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And for the other side, we're going to add in a button that will serve as a clear all button. So let's add in a button. For this one also, we want to fill the height vertically. So we're going to turn its height alignment, turn it on and set it to stretch. For the flexible width, let's turn that on, and let's set the minimum width to 0. As for the height, let's also set the minimum height to 0, so it fills the height of its parent. Now we want it to be a transparent button, or rather just a button that has text. So I'm just going to style that right now. So now the button has been styled. That's more or less it for the section title. So now let's move to the individual filters. So looking at our individual filters, you will notice that the filter titles are basically 3 elements stacked side by side to each other, and all of that is vertically stacked on the inputs. So we're going to use containers to do that. So I'm going to add in a vertical container, and then we're going to remove the border radius and the drop shadow as we don't need that. As for the minimum width, set that to 0, and for the height, we want it to have a static height, so we are going to turn off the flexible width and set the height to about 90. As for the padding, let's do a 5 padding all around it. So 5 at the top, 5 at the bottom, 5 on the left, and 5 on the right. So let's just rename it to container filter 1. So that will serve as our first filter. Then let's add in the top side. So the top section is going to be horizontal container. So let's add in a horizontal container now. And for this one, let's set the height to about 40. So we're going to turn off the flexible height and set the height to 40. Let's also remove the drop shadow and border radius. Okay. And then let's start adding the individual elements. So the first one we're going to add in is an SVG icon. So if you don't know how to add custom SVGs into your app, check out my previous video and check the chapter on SVG management. So let's add that. We are going to add in an image control, and then let's set the height to about, or the width rather, to about 30. And as for the height, let's make it stretch to fill the container and set the minimum height to 0. And then for the image property, we're going to add in this code. Okay, so this is rendering our search icon and using our blue color as the color for the search icon. Alright, so let's add in a top and bottom padding of 7 just to make it a little bit smaller and compact inside of the page. And for the section, or for the filter title container rather, let's set in a padding also on the top, bottom, and right of 5. Alright, and then yeah, now let's add in our text. So the text is more or less similar to the one on the top, so I'm just going to copy that and paste that here. However, we'll need to resize it a bit, and then let's add in our button also. And for this one, we're just going to set the value to clear. Now for this one, we want, in this case, we want the text to take the bulk of the width. So we're going to turn on flexible width. Let's set the minimum width to 0. And then as for the button, let's turn off the flexible width. All right. Yeah, so that's great. So the next step is the actual input. And for the search, we already have one here, so we can just copy that one instead of having to restyle it again. So I'm going to copy the whole container and then paste that inside of here. You can also just use a normal text input rather than restyle it, but this one is what I want to use. As for the width, let's set it to stretch and set the minimum width to 0. And yeah, that's great. Let's test it out. Right, and then do that. So the next thing is to do the clear functionality basically. So the name of the input, let's copy that, and then for the clear button, we're going to add this code. So reset text input. So what that will do is to reset it anytime you click it. So let's type something there, and if you click this, you reset it. And yeah, so that's the basic structure of the individual filters. So you can copy that and paste it as many times as needed. So I'm going to just copy it, so Control C, and then paste it inside of the parent container. Now this one is going to serve as the filter for the make column. So let's change the texts to make. Let's also change the icon. I'm going to change that to from search to our tags light. All right, and that looks great. And this one is going to be a drop down filter. And if you've been developing for a while, you know that combo boxes don't have a native border radius property, meaning that we can't add these rounded edges to it by default. So now the way around it is to add it within a container. I already have a container here, so we can just delete the text input and the search icon from that. We don't need that. And the clear button is also having issue because we've deleted the text, so let's also clear that. So now if we add in a combo box inside of this combo box or drop down, it will take on the rounded edge of the parent container, meaning that you can add in any border radius you want to add into it. But by default, the combo box itself doesn't have any radius property, any border radius property. So yeah, that's the trick to adding border radius to drop downs or combo boxes. And also, if you want it to have like a border, you will just do the border on the parent container. So for this one, we want a border of 1, and we want the color to be gray, just like the rest of the app. And once you do that, it should clear the border from the combo box itself, so you won't have two borders clashing. So you're going to set this one, set the border to none, and yeah, that's that. So the next thing is just to style this combo box to fit the rest of the app. So let's do that. But before that, we need to set the width and height to match the parent. So just make sure the X value is equal to 0, the Y value is also equal to 0, and then for the width, set that to parent the width, and for the height also, set that to parent or height. What this will do is that it will make sure that whatever sizing you apply to the parent container, it will be applied to the combo box also. Yeah, so yeah, let's style now. Okay, now the combo box has been styled. If you want to know all about styling combo boxes, check out my video on how to create modern forms, and there was a section on how to style combo boxes, radio buttons, even date pickers also. So check that video if you're interested in learning how to do it. So now let's set the input placeholder, the text placeholder. Instead of find items, I want it to be select car make. All right, so now all of that is done. The next step is to just set the data source for the item. So we are going to set it to this formula. So this is checking the car details and checking all the distinct values in the make column, and then I'm sorting all of those values alphabetically. And if you check our drop down, and we can see like all the different car makes in my database. And yeah, that's the last step is just to set the clear button to actually reset that on click of it. So we're going to say reset combo box 2. All right, and if you test that out also, if you select BMW, if you click clear, it clears the value.
Nice.
Yeah, that is that. And we are just going to copy that also, since the next filter is going to be a drop down, and that will be for the year. So I'm going to copy that and paste it inside the parent container. Great. So the next step is to set up the data source for our year drop down. So this drop down should contain all years from 2017, which is our earliest year, up until now, 2024. So for this, we are going to use the sequence function. For those that aren't familiar with the sequence function, it basically returns a single column table of sequential numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4. And we can more or less do that for our years. So let's add in the sequence function. The first parameter is requesting is basically the number of records. So let's put that as 10 for now. And then the next parameter is basically what do you want to be the first number in the sequence. So let's say 2024 because that's our current year, right? And then the next parameter is the step that you want it to be. So now this one can be a positive number or a negative number. So if we say -1, so that means it's going to count from 2024 10 times -1 -1 -1. So that will be okay. Okay, and if we check that, you would see starting from 2024, he removes one until it gets to 2015, which is about 10 records. So now obviously we can't hard code this, we need to make it dynamic. So for the year, we can just do a function to select the current year. So you're going to say year, and inside of that you're going to do the today value. So today basically just gives the date of today. So that's fine. And then for the number of records, you want it to start counting from the earliest year up until now. So that's just basically 2024 minus 2017. So we can basically just do that also mathematically. So we're going to copy the year. So that's 2024 minus 2017. You can also do like minimum year and all of this, but we can just say 2017 since we know that's the earliest year. All right, and let's check that out. Oh, so it starts from 2018. So let's add 2 + 1. All right, so now this starts from 2017. One thing to note is that the combo box cannot search if the values are numerical values. I know the sequence function returns a table of numerical values. So what we need to do first is to change it from these numerical values to the text values. And to do that, we are going to be using the for all function.
Yeah, right.
And now you're most likely wondering, the for all function is like for loops and all, but what most people don't know is that for all function can also return a table of values. So let's see how that will work out. So for this, we're going to enclose it in a for all function. So for all, and then what we want it to return is a text value of the record. So text value, and that will return it as basically text instead of numbers. And then we can basically change the is searchable back to true, and then we'll be able to search, you know, via the year. So 2024, you know, you search by that, and that's great. Let's also turn off allow multiple selection since we want it to be single select, and we'll do the same thing for the car make drop down. And yeah, that is that. Let's also see if it's clearing. Yeah, that's great. So this is more or less the general structure. So you can copy this and paste a number of times and basically style as needed. So I'm just going to do that.
One eternity later.
Now I've copied and pasted them a bunch of times. I've also done the different settings for the individual filters. Now the next thing is to make sure that for your parent container, you need to set the vertical overflow to scroll. What that does is once the number of items you've added inside of your container is more than the allowed height for that container, it adds a scroll bar, and then it allows you basically to scroll through all the added stuff. So this allows you to add as many filters as needed. If you are adding like the filters on your main page here, you know, you will be limited to real estate on the page, and you have to maybe just pick the most important filters. But in this kind of setup, you can add as many as needed, since you would have a scroll bar for you to scroll through the different filters that you can add. Now for all of them, they have more or less the same setting. We have the icon, the name, the clear button, and then for the filters that have a range, it's basically just a it's basically just a horizontal container. So this one, I've added a horizontal container, And inside of that, we have the first date picker, then this label. This one is a label, and I just added in a hyphen, and then the other date picker. The reason why I'm adding the date picker inside of a container is because, similar to the combo box, the date picker doesn't have a default border radius property, and we need to add a border radius to the input to match the rest of the app, and that is why I'm doing it inside of the container. As for the styling, as I said, I've done a video on how to style different inputs, so check my video on how to create a modern form. I also showed how to style date pickers there. For this one, it's just the settings on the screen. And then for the next one, which is the range for the monthly lease rate. So since the text input has a default border radius setting, we don't need to put it inside of a container, since we can just directly set the border radius. So the width setting for both of them, for the two inputs, I've set the flexible width, I've turned it on, set the minimum width to 0. However, for the label, I set a static width of 30. Yeah, so that's that. And then for this one is simply a radio button. Sorry, radio control, and you don't really need so much styling on that. You just need to make sure that it is, set correctly within the container. So you can set the width to stretch, set the minimum width to 0, and then the height, you can just make it as big or as tall or small as you need it. And yeah, that is more or less that as for the filters. The next step is to do the clear all. For this ones, for the ones that are ranges, for the clear, you need to clear the two items together. So I've used a concurrent function to clear the two of them together. You can also just do reset, but using concurrent makes it do it at the same time, and that is faster as regards performance and all of that. So I'm resetting the first one and resetting the second one together, and it's the same thing for the min max filter, also resetting both of them together. So the next step is to do the button, reset everything. So what you're just going to do is basically copy all of the individual clear functions, and then just paste that inside of here. So let's do that. Okay, and yeah, it's basically all of the individual clear, and similar to how we're doing concurrent for this ones, we are doing concurrent for basically the whole thing. Okay, yeah, so now that is done, we are done with the structural layout, we're done with the individual filters and all of those. The next thing is to do the filter counter inside of the button. So let's do that. So for this one, we are going to select our custom button, and then we are going to add in a non-responsive container now. And then for the non-responsive container, let's set the width and height to 25, since we want it to be more or less like a circle, and then we want it to be vertically aligned inside of its parents. So let's set the y value to parent.height minus self.height divided by 2. So parent.height minus self.height divided by 2. That will make it vertically aligned. And then for the x value, we want it to be 10 pixels away from the right of the container. So let's set the x value to parent.width minus self.width minus 10. And then for the button itself, let's increase it to 120 for now. All right. So now let's go back to the container as to house the counter. First of all, let's remove the drop shadow. We do not need that. And then for the border radius, let's set that to 30. For the color, let's use I'm going to use the secondary color, which is the blue I'm using all around the app. So I'm going to select color and set it to our secondary color. So that is blue. So now all we need to do is to add in a text label inside of that. So let's rename the container to container filter count so we can reference it easier. So for this one, I'm going to add in a text label. Okay. All right. So now the next thing is to do the actual, the actual count of the value, so rather than a static value, to actually count the individual filters. So let's do that. Let's add in this code there. So what this is doing is checking all the individual filters if they are blank. So let's take a look at this one, for example. If ti_search is blank, it is going to return a value of 0, but if it is not blank, it's going to return a value of 1. If dd_make is blank, it's going to return a value of 0, but if it's not blank, it's going to return a value of 1. So we are doing that for all of the filters, and then all the numbers will be added, and that will basically give us the number of active filters. And then for the cases that are ranges, so let's take, for instance, purchase date, which is from and to. What we are basically checking is if both of them are blank. So if both of them are blank, that means obviously there is no value there, but if at least one of them has a value, we should count it. So you're basically checking if it's blank date picker purchase date from, and is blank date picker purchase date to. If both of them are blank, that is when you should output a value of 0, but if any of them have a value, output a value of 1, and then basically adding everything all together. So let's test that out. Let's add in a filter here, it's counting it. Let's add another filter here, it's counting it, and then let's add in a filter here, it's counting it. And if we clear all, it basically clears everything.
They're nice.
So now what we want to do is to make this text only visible when there is a filter that is applied. But before that, let's rename it to LBL filter count so we can reference it easier. So what we are going to do is to set the visible property of the container itself. So this container, we are going to set the visible property to this value. So we are basically checking if the value inside of this LBL_filter count is greater than 0. So if it is greater than 0, it should then show the text, but if it is equal to 0, it should not show anything. So if we test that out now and we add in a value, you see it becomes visible. If we add in another one, it's still visible, but once we clear it, you see it's more or less becomes invisible. As for the size of the button itself, we want the button to become a little bit smaller when it doesn't have any value. So let's select the button, and the width, instead of just hard coding it to 120, we are going to add in this condition. So if the text is greater than 0, meaning if it's a filter is applied, we are going to make the width 120, else the width will be 90. So if we test that out now it's 90. Once we add in the filter, it becomes 120, giving enough space for the filter counter, and then it adds that filter counter here. And we also want to add the filter counter beside this text here. So let's copy the whole container and paste it here. So I'm going to select this and then paste. Obviously we need to restyle it and all of that. So for the width, let's turn off flexible width and set the width to 25. Let's also set the height alignment to center, and the height is also 25. So now we just need to move it over to the left. So if we click reorder and move left, it should move it to the left. And then for the filter, we just need to reduce the size or the width of it. So let's turn off flexible height, which is already off, and then we set the width to 60, and that brings the counter just beside it. The last step is to basically just apply the filters to our gallery. So let's do that. So we are using the TI search to search these columns, the make column, model, license plate, VIN, insurance policy number, and all of this. So yeah, I think we should also add it here as an hint text. Search by make, model, blah 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 blah, and let's also add it inside of the tooltip, right? And then if you check that out in the tooltip, it shows it, and then for the text input itself, it shows how you can search. Okay, and then if you check the filter condition, you can see that I'm putting, this is blank, is blank. This is basically just to make sure that if the filters are blank, it doesn't affect the rest of the records in any way. And let's test that out now. If we were to set the make to BMW, it should show only BMW. If we were to check the year as 2022, it's working fine. already.
I like it a lot.
The next thing I want to do is to connect this text input to this one. So basically, when they enter any value here, it should be replicated here, and it should count as a filter, which will then filter the table. So to do that, we need to use a variable to connect them. So what we are going to do is we select this text input, and in the onChange property, we're going to add in this code here. So we are basically going to set our variable to the text that has been input inside of the text input, and then this what's it called now? This variable we just created, we will set that as the default value, and then we do the same thing for the other one. So on change, we are going to set that to set var search text to the self.text, and then default value, we set that to var search.text. So let's test that out now. If we say ghi, you can see it also adds it in the top here, and if we clear the text here and add in, let's say, yza, you can see it also adds the text here. So now the clear obviously won't work, since we need to also clear the variable. So let's do that. So before we reset the text input, what we want to do is to first set the search text to a blank string, and then we can reset it. So that way, if we click clear, it would reset the variable and then reset the text input. And then we do the same thing for the clear all. Before the concurrent action, let's add in reserve. So if we test that again now, let's add in ghi. So if we clear all, it clears it. Let's also add in just some blank text and clear it. So now that is working fine. So let's also do the hint text. Let's change that up for the one on the top. Yeah, and that is basically that. We are done with the filter structure. We showed how to count the individual filters. We showed how to add multiple filters in a container by leveraging the vertical scroll or vertical overflow property as a scroll function, and all of those. So now the last thing is in cases where what's it called now, where your app is not a partially responsive app, or it's not fully responsive. In that case, what you need to do is to treat the filters as a pop-up filter. So to do that, first of all, we need to, let me first close this. On the home screen, you need to create basically a pop-up. So let's add in a non-responsive container first, and we need to make sure this fills the entire screen. So if we set that to 0, set x and y to 0 rather, and set the width to parent the width, set the height also to parent.height, right? And then for the background color, we want it to be a 50% opacity black. So this is black with 50% opacity. We don't need any border radius, we're going to set that to 0. We don't need any drop shadow, we're setting that to none. And then inside of this, we are basically just going to what's it called, copy our filters, the filters we added there. So we just copy this whole container and basically just paste it here. First of all, we need to make sure it fills the height of the parents. So we're going to set its height to parent.height, and let's also make sure it's visible for now. Let's set it to true. Then let's set the background color to match the rest of the app. I'm going to set it to the primary color, which is gray, and yeah, that's fine. So what we are going to do, we want it to be on the right of the screen. So for the X property, we are going to set that to parent the width minus self dot width, and that will bring it to the right. And as for the actual width, we want it to be 30% of the total width of the page. So we're going to set it to parent.width times 30%. So that makes it take only 30% of the width. Now, we want this to open and close on click of our filter button. And then once we click outside of the filter, we want it to basically hide the filter. So to do that, let's add in a button and make it transparent. So we add in a button. Then we need to make sure it is at the back of the filter. So you reorder it and bring it or send it to the back. And then we set the X value to 0, set the Y value to 0. For the width, let's set it to parent.width. For the height, we set it to parent.height. Let's also remove the text. We don't need that. And then for the background color, we are going to set it to transparent. For the for the border type, we're going to set it to none. And then just need to make sure that the hover fill also is transparent. So color dot transparent. Same thing for the hover fill. The hover fill should be color dot transparent, so it will always be transparent. All right, so what we are going to do is that on click of this button, we want it to basically toggle our variable that makes the filter show or hidden. So we are going to set var filter open. Basically the what's it called now? Let me hide this temporarily. Basically the same FX code that we're using for our button here. We're going to basically use that for our button here. All right, and then lastly, we just need to make sure that the visibility of the container itself is set to that variable. So let me modify the other one so it doesn't clash. I'm just going to comment this one out. So now what happens is when we click this one, it shows the filter as a pop-up, and then we can do any filtering we want to do here. You're adding whatever you need to add here, and then once that is done, once you click outside the filter, rather, it basically clears it. Now obviously this one is still connected to our old filter, but that is basically how you do it if your screen is a static layout. And it's the same thing, if you are building a fully responsive layout. If you want this to be the same filter for your mobile view, you just need to modify the filter, the view to basically show as a pop-up, and then you can use it in different cases, different scenarios. Yeah, and that is that about the filter, the custom filter layout. And that brings us to the end of this video. If you've enjoyed the video or at least learned something, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to get notified when I release new content. Thanks for watching, and catch you in the next one.